There's an island just 130 kilometers from China that Beijing says does not exist. 23 million people live there. America sells it weapons while refusing to officially recognize it as a country. And its future may decide whether the world's two most powerful nations stay at peace. Because for Xi Jinping, Taiwan is not just an island, it's unfinished business. And to understand why Taiwan matters so much to China today, you have to go back to a war that never really ended. It's the late 1940s, China is ripping itself apart. A brutal civil war is nearing its end. On one side, Mao Zedong's communists. On the other, the Republic of China government led by Chiang Kai-shek. And by 1949, Mao is winning. City after city falls, the old Chinese government is pushed south, until eventually it reaches the coast. Nearly 2 million people, soldiers, officials and civilians, flee across the Taiwan Strait to an island just off China's coast. An island that had not long before belonged to Japan. For 50 years, Taiwan had been a Japanese colony. Only after World War II had control returned to Chinese hands. And now it was becoming something else again, because Mao cannot follow, not yet. China has won the war on the mainland, but it does not yet have the navy or air power needed to cross the strait. So Mao declares a new country, the People's Republic of China, modern China. But there's a problem. Across the water, the defeated government refuses to disappear. It keeps its army, its institutions, its flag, and most importantly, it still claims to be the legitimate government of China. So suddenly, there are two governments, both claiming to be China, and neither believes the situation is permanent. At first, Mao likely expected reunification to happen relatively quickly. After all, the island sits just 130 kilometers off China's coast. But there was a problem. Winning a civil war and crossing a strait are very different things. China had armies, what it didn't have yet was the navy or air power needed to launch an invasion across a stormy stretch of sea. And that delay changed everything. Because in 1950, war erupts in Korea. Washington suddenly feared the spread of communism across Asia. So President Truman sent the US 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait. And overnight, Taiwan stopped being just the final chapter of the Chinese Civil War and became part of the Cold War itself. And this is where the story changes, because from Beijing's perspective, foreign powers had stepped into a Chinese civil war and frozen it in place. Which matters, because China does not see Taiwan the way most people in the West do. It does not see it as a distant, independent island nation, it sees it as unfinished history. But over time, Taiwan started becoming something very different. For decades, Taiwan was ruled under martial law. Political opposition was crushed. Thousands were imprisoned during what became known as the White Terror. But by the 1980s and 90s, Taiwan transformed. Martial law ended, free elections were held, and the island built one of Asia's most advanced economies. Slowly, a new identity emerged, as younger generations on Taiwan increasingly stopped seeing themselves primarily as Chinese and started seeing themselves as Taiwanese. And the longer that political separation continues, the harder reunification becomes. And this is where Xi Jinping enters the story, because Xi does not talk about Taiwan as just a strategic objective. He talks about it as part of China's national rejuvenation, the restoration of China after what Chinese leaders call the Century of Humiliation, a period when foreign powers invaded, dominated, and weakened the country. In that story, Taiwan stands out, because from Beijing's perspective, China still has one major piece missing. Xi has repeatedly linked reunification with the future of the Chinese nation itself. Not necessarily tomorrow, not necessarily through war, but eventually. And that's the key to understanding Taiwan. China did not suddenly become interested in the island. The interest was always there. What changed was the growing fear that time might no longer be working in Beijing's favour. But Taiwan is not just China's concern. It sits near some of the busiest shipping routes on Earth. It is also central to what strategists call the First Island Chain, a line of territories stretching from Japan down toward the Philippines. For the United States and its allies, that chain helps limit Chinese naval power pushing into the wider Pacific. For China, Taiwan is a barrier sitting directly off its coast. But Taiwan doesn't just sit in an important place, it also makes important things. Around 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips are produced here. The tiny components powering phones, servers, AI systems, cars, and modern weapons. So if conflict ever erupted over Taiwan, it would not remain local for long. the global economy would feel it almost immediately, which is why Taiwan is often described as one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth. But this is where the story becomes complicated, because Taiwan presents China with a dilemma. The island matters enormously to Beijing, but taking it would be extraordinarily difficult. This would not look like a land war. The Taiwan Strait, which separates Taiwan from mainland China, is a stretch of sea with strong currents, unpredictable weather, and only a limited number of beaches suitable for a large amphibious landing. China would have to move troops, ships, and supplies across open water under fire, and establish control before outside forces could intervene. One of the hardest military operations imaginable, and Beijing knows that, which is why China still says it prefers peaceful reunification, but it has never ruled out force. And this creates another dilemma, this time for the United States, because America continues selling weapons to Taiwan, while remaining deliberately vague about whether US forces would actually fight to defend it. That ambiguity has shaped the region for decades, not fully committing, not fully stepping away, trying to deter both sides at once. And everyone involved understands the risk, because if China moves too aggressively, it risks war with the United States, but if Beijing waits too long, Taiwan may drift even further away, politically and culturally. So when people ask why is Taiwan next for Xi Jinping, the answer is not really about what's next. Because from Beijing's perspective, Taiwan was never separate from the story in the first place. This is not some sudden territorial ambition, it was the final, unresolved chapter of the Chinese Civil War. A war paused by geography, shielded by American power, and transformed by 75 years of history. Because the reality is this, one of the world's most dangerous conflicts is not a new fight beginning. It's unfinished business that never truly ended. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.